Well, evening, folks. Old Buster coming to you again. Got another little story. Name of Chores. I want to say I appreciate all of y'all dropping by and stopping in and listening to us every week. Of course, if you ever have anything to say or want the originals with all the pictures and other writing about sites we've seen, well, just write Buster and the Boys at yahoo.com. Thank you for dropping in again, and be glad to hear from any of you. Chores. Walter told Buster to hold him down. Walter was a-cutting some hogs, and Buster was a-helping him for a day or two. Well, Buster's grandpa Gus and Walter's pa made it up to trade off some labor with the boys doing the work, which they was all right by them. There was some yearling calves to brand, and them dang hoofs hurt like the dickens when they kicked you. Buster and Walter told Walter he'd do the branding and cutting and let Walter do the bulldogging and holding. You know Walter, he just laughed and kept on grinning whilst Buster got kicked again. Well, boy, Walter hollered to Buster to not let him get away, and it weren't going to hurt not too long, especially when he quit kicking him. Well, long towards evening, Buster and Walter was a-loading a pretty rough old bull. He was half Brahma and half Santa Gertrudis and meaner than all get out. Some hands and Walter herded that bull to about halfway into a trailer when one of them boys put the cattle prod to him. That old bull just wasn't going to load, and the feller figured he'd juice him up a mite. Well, Buster was a-minding the gate to the trailer and was a-standing twixt the gate and a cross-tie corner post when the hired hand went to hit the bull with the prod. Just as he was going to poke him in the hindquarters, he stumbled and poked the bull in his and privates instead. Well, now, that old bull went plumb ballistic, I tell you. He started a-swinging his and hayed left and right and stepped down hard on the end of the trailer. When he did, it tipped the trailer to the left and trapped Buster twixt the trailer and the cross-tie. Well, every time that bull tossed his and hayed, them horns of his'n was passed by Buster's belly where he could feel the air as them horns went by. The first pass took off Buster's shirt, but didn't hurt him none. Each pass Buster had to suck in his and belly to keep from getting gored. Finally, Walter prodded the bull on into the trailer, and Buster shut the gate. Walter seed what was happening and knowed he had to do something real fast or Buster was going to get his and self hurt real bad. His and quick thinking sure enough did the trick and saved Buster a passel of misery, I tell you. Got me warm in here. Well, they got the bull to load and on in the trailer and took it to the sale. And when they got him in there, it took the pressure off of Buster and let him get loose. Well, Buster told Walter he was sure glad he ain't had supper yet, because he surely would have been in a pickle if his belly was pushed out any further. They got the trailer pulled out, and when they did, they had to move another bull of Walter's into the pen. He was a full Brahma that they had called Buffalo. Old Buffalo was pretty gentle most of the time, and you could lead him around by just feeding him nuggets out of your hand or dropping them on the ground. But Buffalo and that other old bull that they just loaded had been a-fighting for a spell over the cows, and Buffalo was a mite fractious over that. Well, when they let old Buffalo into the pen, he went straight for the trailer. One what was carrying that half-breed he had been a-fighting. Buffalo was a-bellering something fierce and a-pawing and a-snorting. Now, old Buffalo had a rack on him, and he just wasn't going to be denied to get to that other bull. Trailer or no trailer. Buffalo got his and horns underneath the cross-tie rail and snapped her like a twig. His and old neck corded up, and you could just see the power in him as he come up from under that tie. Bull was some kind of stout, I tell you. Walter hollered to one of the hands pulling the trailer to take it on out to the barn and away from the holding pens. Of course, Buffalo was out by then, and Walter just took some nuggets, and Buffalo followed him back on into the pen. After that other bull was gone, old Buffalo settled down and didn't give no more trouble. Walter said his and Pa was going to sell that half-breed bull up at the auction and reckoned he was bound for Hamburger. Well, Buster told Walter he'd be glad when they got over to their place. You see, folks traded out and helped each other when they needed a hand when they was short-handed. Well, Buster had to cut and haul wood out of the 7 acres next to Indian Bayou that was mostly slash. They had to do that before the weather broke, bad and had to leave it. Well, Buster stayed the night with Walter, and they got up early the next morning hoping to finish up before nightfall. Harvest was a-coming on, and winter wasn't going to be long a-coming neither. There was some hay that had seasoned, and it had to be moved from the lower 40 to the barn. Just before finishing up breakfast, Walter's ma looked out the window and told the boys to look what was a-coming. Danged if it wasn't Hired and Jesse. When they got to the house, Miss Ollinger told Jesse and Hired to sit, and she fetched them some coffee and 2 slabs of apple pie she'd baked. Then she asked if they wanted breakfast. Well, Hired said sure enough, but Jesse didn't get time to say nothing before she said, "Jesse Darrell McBrayer, I don't want to hear no back talk from you. You're going to eat in my house. I knowed your ma took you to the doctor 'cause she felt you was poorly, and you were telling old Doc Harris she wouldn't feed you none. Your ma is plumb word sick over you, and so you is going to eat this here breakfast I'm a-fixin', and ain't going to be no bones about it neither. I'm going to sit right here till you eat every bite of it too." Well, her word was law, and that was exactly what was done. Jesse had some biscuits and gravy and pan-fried taters and some scrambled eggs and slab bacon and a glass of cold milk to boot. 'Cause everybody knowed that Jesse's ma would feed him now. They ain't know what to think about her not feeding him. Well, the boy was full in the tick. He told all the other boys that he just didn't know if he could help with the hay or not, just might have to take a nap first. Well, all 4 of them made it on out to the lower 40 to haul the hay into the barn along with Mr. Ollinger. Hired and Jesse's paws knowed Mr. Ollinger was short-handed and sent him over to help. You see, in country schools, you was always let out of school for planting, harvesting, and deer hunting season. Well, Jesse and Hired had chores sure enough, but nothing like Walter and Buster because of their farming and all. Plus, Jesse and Hired made up for all of them to do something over the weekend. That's why they wanted to help get their chores done faster so they had some time to themselves. Well, Jesse drove the truck and Hired drove the tractor whilst Buster done the bucking up of the hay bales to Walter. Walter stacked them, and it wasn't long till they had a load to go to the barn. With all 4 of them working at a steady pace, the work in the field was done before dinner. When they got back to the barn, they used a conveyor to move the hay bales to the loft. Buster put the bales on the conveyor. Jesse brought the bales to Buster. Walter and Hired stacked them on the loft. They all was right proud Walter's pa had borrowed extra trailers so they didn't have to load and unload each time. Well, supper was still a ways off since they done loading and unloading so quick. So they figured to shoot them some marbles. Well, Hired had some steelies he got from some bearings in his and Paul's shop. Them ball bearings made for real good shooting and had some different sizes too. Well, after a few games, Walter's 2 sisters, Mary Gale and Carla May, come up to him and asked if they had time to help him for a bit. Well, the Ollingers had right smart of a truck patch, not only for their own use to feed the family, but to sell off for extra cash and also to give to the church and old folks home there in town. The boys all lent a hand and got it done so the gals could carry the donation to the town. Both the gals had other things on their mind like Gary Ashland and Barry Brown. Them boys been hankering after them gals for a spell. Walter told his and sisters he wasn't much for them boys coming around and just might punch them in the nose. If an Ike and Melvin was around, they'd sure enough help and be glad to. Not that them 2 was really disliked so much by Walter and his brothers, but it was just the idea they was a sparking their sisters. Well, anyway, it got on to supper, and all the boys ate with Walter's folks, and Mrs. Ollinger put a heck of a dadgum feed on, and the evil eye on Jesse. Said she wasn't going to let Sarah McBrayer say her boy wasn't fed at her house, no sirree. You see, all the boys' maws quilted together and played bunco too, every week of taking turns at each other's house. Also, it just wasn't polite not to eat and at least drink something when you went to see folks. Plumb disrespected them. Of course, all them ladies went to prayer meeting too. Before Buster, Hired, and Jesse left, they made up to meet at Buster's the next day to cut and haul wood. After that, they was going to paint Jesse's grandpa's barn. Well, Hired's pa was short-handed and on a big job, and he had just needed some help for a couple of 3 days or so, too. So reckon the boys would all be a mite busy for the next week. Maybe even 2 weeks. Buster and the boys lit out for the woods early after breakfast in an old Chevrolet pickup they used for farm work. It was Buster's truck, and it was old and ugly, but run real good. Buster done had the chainsaws, gas and oil, spare chains, files, wrenches, splitting maws, and wedges loaded up when the boys got there. Jesse stayed over the night before because he had some studying to do at the library and appointment with Mr. Green. He was the lawyer that was the family and the boys' legal advisor. What I was going to say before I got tickled is he sure didn't want to go home and let his mama get on to him about that eating. Well, Jesse was figuring to do lawyering for a living and had to take a test to go to the University of Alabama. Another reason was Bear Bryant was there coaching, and his and folks knowed Bear when he was in Carthage, Arkansas. Bear was born in Arkansas, and Jesse's pa met Bear and his and people through the gas company, Southern Natural Gas. Jesse's Uncle Cecil had a deer lease with Bear's pa and uncles in that part of the woods too, and went down to hunt every year. Buster said he was going to drive down the levee and down to the bottom since it was dry. If the net was too wet, he'd have to leave the truck up at the top, and that would make things a trifle harder, toting things backwards and forwards. All that wood gets to be heavy after a while. Sure enough, it was dry, but that old levee was a mite more steep than you would have figured. Well, Buster just bailed on off down the slope, but it was too much of an incline to stop, and Buster wrapped that Chevy around a pretty good old sweet gum tree. It kind of bent like a horseshoe. It still run all right, but run down the road a little sideways, east to west, I reckon. Well, the boys got on to cutting trees. They fell might near 2 bob truck loads before they went to splitting, and was getting along real fine till Buster come up to near the bayou. Twixt lightning and a windstorm, a big old post oak tree done seed his and day. It was uprooted and leaning into some of them bitter pecan trees they was cutting for smoking and barbecuing. They called a tree like that a widowmaker, 'cause it done killed many a logger. It was so dangerous. You just never knowed when it was going to fall hung up like that. The wind could blow it over even, or just gravity itself. Buster was off a bit from Hired and Walter, and Jesse was going for water and something to chomp on for when they all took 'em a break at mid-morning. About that time they heard a crashing and Buster a hollering. Walter and Hired got there first, and then Jesse. What had happened was that Buster cut one of them bitter pecans, and it fell over on the tree supporting the old post oak. It twisted and took Buster to ground, falling on him like it did. Buster Johnson Red kicked back and cut Buster's leg when that tree fell on him. He still carries a scar today from all that. Buster wasn't hurt really bad, but just trapped under that tree, and the boys couldn't budge it one bit, even with all of them lifting. Buster told the boys it was a mite hard to breathe, and could they get it up off of him a little so he could catch his breath. Hard as the boys tried, they couldn't budge at their tree. All the boys took to cutting on it. Wasn't making no real progress because of the way the tree was buried up in that gumbo and it being across the bar ditch. If they didn't cut it just right, it would pinch Buster in a bind and liable to do him in. Well, about that time, Tench come along. Tench was a right partial to Buster, you know. Tench was a colored feller out from the old cemetery road. He worked out for the Adams boys in the cotton fields and the gin in the winter. How all this come to be is that Buster was coming in late one night and see Tench chained to a post out front of the police station at the old train depot. The story was that Buster stopped his and old Ford and went up to Tench and asked him what in the world he was a-doing chained to that post. Now, it was Christmas Eve, and there was a freezing rain coming down pretty hard and colder than a well-digger in Idaho, I tell you. Well, Tench told Buster that the police picked him up for drinking, coming out of a juke joint on Shadow Lane, and wasn't going to let him go on home for Christmas with his wife and youngins. Well, needless to say, there was a tussle, and they chained him up outside. Well, that put fire in Buster's eye, I tell you. Buster told Tench he'd get him out of there, back home pronto, not to worry. Well, Buster put his coat around Tench and went on inside the police station. Buster hollered out, "Who in the devil was a running the joint round here, and who said to chain Tench to the post out front?" Well, some snotty-nosed ne'er-do-well that didn't know nothing about being a lawman piped up and says he done it. "Well, you better turn him loose," Buster said to the officer. He said he wasn't going to do it. The Buster said he sure enough was, what Buster told him. The police chief was called in, and Buster gave him what for, allowing Tench to be chained up like he's a dog. The chief said they put handcuffs on Tench, and he broke them, snapped them like they weren't nothing, like a twig. He was strong as an ox, he said. The chief said Tench done whooped up on all his officers and took all of them on, and it took all of them to hog tie him. Well, he throwed one plumb through the window. They didn't have no place for him, and him being mean as he was chained outside to teach him a lesson. Well, Buster said to turn him loose, and he'd be responsible for him, and if they didn't, he was going to call Grandpa Gus, and they would all just see what would happen. The chief sure didn't want none of that, since the mayor and Mr. Bill Foster, he was a senior hook and bull of the Arkansas House of Representatives, was their neighbor and friend. The chief brung Tench into the station, and Buster asked Tench for his word that he'd come back after Christmas, they'd settle all this mess. Tench said he'd give his word he would. He just wanted to go home to his family, is all. Well, let me tell you about that. The rest of the story was this young officer, I don't know how he ever got to be a police, but Tench had been in there, and I think he had a beer or two, and he wasn't going to stay, but he come out, and he just figured he'd get him. Well, he picked on the wrong guy. Tench don't lie, and he wasn't drunk, and he told Buster that. And Grandpa Gus come up there, he said, "Listen here, bud, either you gonna turn him loose or me and you fixing to tangle. You gonna turn the man loose, he'll be here. Don't worry about it." Anyway, I just wanted you to know that. Tench wasn't that kind. But back in them days, some folks had it in for colored folks. Anyway, ever since then, Buster was a stepping in high cotton as far as Tench was concerned. Ain't nobody gonna trifle with Buster if he had anything to do with it. Tench picked up a bale of cotton one day when he was working at the gin, and that was witnessed by several folks. The feller was just unnatural stout, and a bale of cotton weighing about 500 pounds. Tench seen something was wrong and hollered over to the other side of the bayou to what was happening. Tench had been rabbit hunting with Mr. Bill's, that's Mr. Bill Sloan, beagle dogs, and they lived right across the road from Buster's grandpa and grandma. With his dogs, and just happened to be there at the right time and the right place. Well, Jesse hollered to Tench that a tree done squashed Buster, and they couldn't get it off of him, and he couldn't breathe none too good. Well, old Tench crossed over a beaver down and come running to help Buster. Well, Walter told Tench that they'd all tried to lift it off of Buster, but just couldn't get the tree to move an inch. Tench told the boys to pull Buster out when he got that tree up, and to do it fast like. He told Howard and Jesse to get some of them chunks they done cut and put it up under the tree to keep it up if and he couldn't hold it long enough. Well, Tench hunkered down under that old post oak and began to lift it. The strain was so bad beads of sweat broke out on his forehead, and his face flushed red, and the veins in his neck corded up like rope. It took about 15 seconds before that tree begun to move. First off, the branches buried up in the ground broke free, and then Tench give a mighty heave and rolled that tree backwards, keeping it from coming back on Buster. Now, it was something just to lift that post oak, but to roll it backwards and keep it from rolling back on him and Buster was something else, I tell you. Took some kind of man. Ain't no telling what that tree weighed. Well, Howard and Jesse rolled them chunks they had up under the tree. They split up. And then all the boys pulled Buster out from under it into safety. Well, Tench seen that Buster was safe, and he dove out from under the tree and let it fall. He was fast for a big feller, and rolled and flipped with his feet running like a steam engine when he hit the ground. He got out of the way just in time, and that post oak took out a swath of half-growed trees for 10 foot. Well, Buster caught his breath and thanked Tench for saving him. Tench said since they was cutting and hauling wood, he'd better help till they was done to make sure nobody was hurt again. Well, Well, Tench told Buster he couldn't let Buster out of his sight for 1 minute because he was always getting himself into some kind of trouble. Well, all the boys just laughed and got out their dinner buckets and rested on that. Buster paid Tench for working with them and kept him on till they was done with all the work for Jesse's Grandpa Esker and hired spot. The day after the Widowmaker fell on Buster, all the boys and Tench showed up to Jesse's Grandpa Esker and Grandma Nanny's house to paint the barn. They waited for the dew to burn off, and whilst they was a-waiting, Grandma and Nanny cooked up some sure enough good eats. Well, Grandpa Esker was a lot like Buster's Grandpa Gus in what they'd eat. Buster would have to admit it would gag a gopher to see what them two fellers would scarf down, I tell you. Fried squirrel was on Grandpa Esker's plate with poke salad and scrambled eggs and sliced tomatoes with sugar sprinkled on them, just like Grandpa Gus. He even had a bowl of rice with milk and sugar too, and a pot full of coffee that put Chicory to shame. When Grandpa Esker took a bite of them eggs, then he took his spoon and turned it over and whacked that squirrel's head and popped it open like a balloon. Then he sucked the brains out of the skull and licked his and chops and smacked his and lips and declared that was a mighty fine breakfast. Whoo, them fellers. Well, Grandpa Esker asked if the boys was going hunting anytime soon, because he dearly loved fried squirrel and rabbit, just like Grandpa Gus. The boys said they didn't reckon so because of other work to be done and all, and had to get to it if they was going to get that barn finished. Well, Grandpa Esker said to Jesse that he done bought the paint, had it all laid out for him. They was to paint each side of the barn with the paint he done put there. It was just like he wanted it, and not to change a thing. Jesse told them all right, and all of them left on out to get started. Grandma Nanny said she'd bring them some iced tea a bit later on, and well water was in the bucket. That old barn didn't need no scraping at all, since it was bare as a cue ball. They all got to painting and layout. Grandpa Esker drawed it out, just like painting by the numbers. Well, they painted the dark for the next 2.5 days and then stood back and looked at their work. It was sure a sight to see, I'm telling you. Never the like in this here county, the boys said. It drawed folks from all around to see that barn. They come from everywhere. Heck, fire, it had its picture took and put on the newspaper, and the radio was a-telling all about it, and the TV folks even come out and talked about Grandpa Esker's barn. The TV reporter asked him why he painted that barn such colors, and there was a passel of them. Nobody could figure out what that painting was supposed to be, or what it's meant to anybody, or what. Grandpa Esker told him it was his business, and that was that. Well, the whole county was a-talking, trying to figure out what them colors meant and why he done it. Well, it was all a mismatch of colors now. When Jesse and the boys left on out after cleaning up, they topped the rise and see the barn in all its glory. They had done a real nice job and painted the barn exactly to Grandpa Esker's instructions. Well, Jesse looked to the boys and Tench and told them he knowed what it was, but not to tell a soul, for it was a secret. Well, Grandpa Esker didn't want nobody but him to know anything about his barn and the painting of it. It was a private affair of his. The boys all give the word they wasn't going to say nothing. Jesse said he done figured it out from not only seeing the barn from up there, but putting 2 and 2 together. From what Grandpa Esker was telling his Grandma Nanny. You see, there people come over from Scotland and been in America since well before the Civil War. It was his way of remembering the past and honoring the future with the McBrayer tartan and the rendition of the flag of their new country. Them plaid colors was on all sides, and the roof was painted in abstract stars and stripes of the flag of the U.S. of A. Each of the double doors was painted a mite different with the colors of the old McBrayer straight bourbon whisker label. That's that whiskey they had up there in Kentucky, you know, from his great-great-grandpa. On one door, and the colors of old McBrayer whiskey on the other. Now, what are you talking about? You wondered about that whiskey? Well, old McBrayer straight bourbon whiskey had a label. And then the colors of old McBrayer whiskey, when it first started, is a little something different. The barn was a beaut to Grandpa Esker, and Grandma Nanny and the boys let them have something to hold on to for the rest of their days. They was right proud of that old barn and what it meant to them, and the boys were glad they could help give them that. They all swore not to breathe a word to nobody about it neither. After all the hullabaloo blowed over, it come a right nice gentle rain and done something mighty interesting to that barn of Jesse's grandparents. All that paint faded in together and turned that old barn to the color of a sunrise on the east side and the color of a sunset on the west. The north and south sides looked like the colors of summer and fall. The barn then faded to a pastel but cheery burnt orange and stayed that way for several months till it all just faded away. Folks are still talking about that barn of Esker McBrayer's to this day. Well, Big Jim Holmes, that's Hired's Paul, was fit to be tied when Hired and the boys got down to the job site. Equipment was broke down and they was behind schedule. This was the biggest job he'd ever had, and if he didn't perform, he'd be plumb out of business. It was a gamble, but if he completed it, it'd be well worth the chance he took. The boys all got to work at doing various jobs where they was needed, and all was going real well for them, but not the other fellers working there. They was trying to get a pipe in the ground that had to be 5 foot across if it was an inch, and just couldn't make no headway. Well, Mr. Holmes had to rework the installation twice, and it couldn't go no further till it was completed. The whole job seemed to be an accident just waiting to happen. Something was always going haywire, even down to going in the wrong direction with a load of pipe for the job. Well, after watching all the doings for 2 days, Hire said to the boys if they would meet up with him the next morning at the job site. He has something to show them. Seeing as how it was a day off for the crew, there weren't nobody around. Well, Hire told the boys he had him an idea about the pipe, and if they were willing to help him, he reckoned they could get that pipe across the cut in the road and covered up by nightfall. Well, Hire went to explaining his idea, and they all allowed it might just work and get this mess of Mr. Holmes was in over and done with. Explaining how this was to be done would take a heap more time than they had, so Hire told them to watch what he was doing. So Hire demonstrated the procedure with some props he put together and showed them how he thought his idea would work, but it would definitely have to be done with the right timing. Then Hire showed what he made and how it would work, and Walter said he'd be hornswoggled for sure if it didn't work. That was a right smart idea, he told Hire, and his and welding was real good too. The gizmo that Hire done come up with was like a stick on a piece of string. If you poked it into a bottle and let it open up, it would reach across the opening of the bottle and you could lift it or pull it, whatever you wanted to do and anywhere. When you was done putting it there where you wanted it, it just turned loose and the string and it fell down out of the way and wasn't going to be a bother neither. Well, Hired had the gizmo welded up for sure, where it was weighted on one end, and when you released the tension, it would go to a vertical instead of a horizontal, and you could pull out the gizmo and reuse it again. Heck of an idea it was. Well, old Hired was grinning from ear to ear, but the proof was in the pudding, as they say, so they got to seeing if it would really work. Hired called it a puller, and had a big old log chain welded to it so the dozer could pull it and it wouldn't break. Well, Hired told Tension Buster it would take the both of them to position the puller, and then he could pull it up tight, and they could put the pipe in position and just keep adding on the pipe, and before long you'd have the pipe installed across the cut in the road. Well, danged if and that puller didn't work like a charm. In fact, the boys got to where they could pull upwards of 3 lengths of pipe a time if they'd use 2 dozers pulling the same together at the same time. Walter did a mite of a touch-up welding on the puller to reinforce the stress points to keep it from breaking due to the extra weight they was pulling with 2 dozers. They got so good at installing that 60-inch pipe that when it come on to quitting time, they only liked 7 more sections to be done with the whole job. Well, all the boys voted to work on into the night and sent Jesse for some sandwiches and sodas and coffee whilst they kept working. They done it in 3 more pulls and finished off covering the pipe in 3 hours' time. At the morning meeting of the crew and supervisors, there was a stir for sure. Mr. Holmes seemed Hired and the boys a grinning and a waiting for him when he got there to the job site. He was downright speechless, I tell you, when he seen what all took place. He was asking everybody who done it and how they done it, and nobody had a clue till Walter up and tells Mr. Holmes that Hire done put the pipe in and covered it up and used this invention, what they called the puller. Well, sir, it come to pass that the job was completed in record time, even with all the previous delays, and Mr. Holmes even got a bonus for getting done early. The pipe manufacturers and companies that installed the pipe had Mr. Holmes up for speaking at their annual meeting to talk on how all it was done. Well, Mr. Holmes give all the credit to Hired and the boys for getting the pipe in, and Hired's invention what made it possible. There was respect earned from that job, I tell you, and Hired told his and Pa that he didn't want no money for his invention if it helped folks. Well, Mr. Holmes was right proud of Hired and the boys too, and told the boys' folks that one night at supper when they was all invited over to the house. The boys got their time off to enjoy themselves, and Mr. Holmes give Tench a permanent job after that, and Tench stayed with Mr. Holmes till he died. Tench only had the one good eye, but he didn't miss much. He was loyal to Buster and right special to the boys and their folks too. He was always included in family get-togethers with his wife and young'uns and was welcome any time. Tench come sometimes, but he had his own people as well as his wife's and went there mostly. Tench was killed by a drunk feller one night several years later, and it sure was a sad day. The boys done had enough money by then and see to it that Tench's wife was took care of and his and young'uns had a college education. Tench's family was good people, and they deserved a chance in life like the opportunities that the boys and their families was blessed with. The fall of their senior year in school would always have a special place in the minds and hearts of the boys when it come to chores. Y'all have a blessed day. Remember them old boys, would you? And how to live your life with 2 words. Do it right. This is old Buster signing out.